Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Mike Peller. I'm the head of school at Vermont Academy. I'm also a board member here at Main Street Arts. I joined just a couple months ago and really proud of that work. And also the co-founder with Zach Brown of the Solstice Project, which is an organization focused on helping to develop climate leadership within independent schools. And I am beside myself excited to have everyone here together to listen to Bill McKibben in a little bit. But we're going to do some introductions. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's here. This work is incredibly important to me, both the work of climate leadership and climate action, but also of community partnership. I'm new to Vermont and new to Vermont Academy. I came just a year ago, and when I got to take off my California plates and screw on my Vermont plates, those green plates that I had coveted for a long time, I was literally sort of like laughing and excited, and I said, I'm a Vermonter. And then someone kind of looked at me and said, not until you've been here for 7 generations. And so I realized it will take some time, but I'm really excited to continue to build the bridge between Vermont Academy and the community. COVID was something that shuttered that for a little bit, and we're really excited to rebuild that connection. So it's important for us that this event that we're holding a week-long conference up on campus, but that we could host it here and open it up to everyone. So I want to introduce the person who's leading this conference, Christine Armiger, who's been in the community for over 20 years. Thank you.
Okay. I actually first want to give a huge shout out to Ashley Soro and Nora from Main Street Arts. Thank you so much. I have had the privilege of raising my son in this community and of finding an incredibly fulfilling career at Vermont Academy for not quite 20 years. I've been working in sustainability and place-based learning and trying to connect our students with the land. And when people ask me what's so special about Vermont Academy, I often say it's Saxon's River. There are very few schools that are so embedded in the DNA of the community. And though it has been incredible to be able to expose my students to this work, I've always felt like there's something more that I need to be doing. I love place-based education. I love our small community in Southern Vermont. When I leave, I have wonderful travels other places, and I can't wait to come back. And I also recognize that we are a small part of a global community that really needs us and needs the kinds of values that we have in Saxon's River. I have had the privilege of working with the Rocky Camp Conservation Commission, which is co-sponsoring this event. I have had the privilege of working with Third Act. I see some friends from Third Act out there. And one of the most inspiring things that has happened to me in a very, very long time was being invited to Alaska to meet Zach Brown at the Tidelines Institute, and to see the way he is uplifting the important work that I feel that I've been doing here to a much more impactful global scale. And Mike Peller invited me and other administrators and science teachers and humanities teachers into a very important conversation about how schools can lead the way towards climate leadership and action. That's a big part of the conversation that we're going to be having tonight. That is a part of the mission of the Solstice Project. But a true energetic force of this work is Zach Brown, so I want to welcome him to the mic.
Thanks very much. It's not every day that you get to introduce your hero. The only way that I know how to introduce a living legend like Bill McKibben is through a story. I met Bill when he came to visit Alaska a few years ago, and the work we've been doing at Tidelines Institute. We're near Glacier Bay National Park. Some of you may know it, in the southeast part of the state. So we were motoring together through gorgeous snow-capped peaks and glaciated flanks and brown bears and whales all around. And we got out to the remote Tidelines campus, where I've been working to help kind of grow the climate movement through education. And Bill, stepped out onto the dock and said, you should have a sign here saying, "Welcome to the real world." And I was thrilled to have this hero of mine out at the campus. First thing I wanted to do was show him our renewable energy systems. Of course, we're an off-grid remote campus, and so we run entirely on renewable energy that we generate ourselves. So we hiked 300 vertical feet up the hill to check out our hydroelectric system and the intake for that. Got up there and talked about renewable energy systems a little bit, and when we turned around, Bill slipped on the steep, muddy slope, sat down hard, and cracked his wrist. We thought it was just badly sprained. It turns out later it was, in fact, fractured. And so I'm absolutely mortified by this. I've just met my hero. I've met him for 6 hours, and he's already got a broken bone. And I'm just like, oh my God. So we help him down the slope, and he says, don't tell Exxon that I broke a bone while visiting a renewable energy facility. They'll never let me live that down. So we get him, into a little splint, and he's sitting there in an easy chair with his splint. And sitting in easy chairs is not what Bill McKibben does. He's incredibly energetic and prolific. And so he says, "Zach, let me read your manuscript." He somehow had learned that I had written a memoir about my own journey through the climate crisis, from science to education and activism. And it was not a memoir at that time. It was less of a manuscript than a sort of a vomitous mass of various stories that might one day be turned into something worth publishing. But I gulped, and I handed him my computer and let him read these hundreds of thousands of words, which he did in less than 2 hours, because he's like a genius. And then not only did he read it, but he came away with all of these brilliant critiques that were exactly what I needed to hear in order to transform it into something worth publishing that could give me more of a platform to speak out on the climate crisis. Because it was just an unbelievable show of the brilliance that he has brought to the climate crisis for 40 years. But it didn't end there, because he then authored various introductions to try to help me publish this thing. In fact, just yesterday, he introduced me to a potential publisher here in Vermont who now wants to meet with me. This is who McKibben is. He gives, and he gives, and he gives, and he gives, because his heart aches for the pain of the world, and he gives everything that he possibly can. Bill McKibben has a newsletter that you should all sign up for. It's called The Crucial Years. It has 125,000 followers right now. The Crucial Years is your best one-stop shop for what's happening right now in energy and climate. It comes out about every week. Bill could charge his subscribers $100 a year to subscribe for that thing. You should think about that. Would be $10 million, Bill. You should think about that. But he doesn't. He gives it away for free. He could charge massive speaker fees for coming and doing events like this, but he doesn't. You did it, did you? But he doesn't. He gives it away for free. He gives and he gives and he gives, and he will never stop fighting until we've defeated the bastards in the oil industry who are burning down this world to make themselves even richer, and we've won our clean energy future. And the best that we can do to honor his tremendous dedication is join him in this work. So, the man, the myth, the legend, Bill McKibben.
Testament to my boundless energy, it's going to disappoint you all that I'm going to sit down because it's the end of a long day, and I'm incredibly happy to be here. Oh, that's nice too. Incredibly happy to be here, get to see my friend Zach, get to meet all kinds of the good people at the Solstice Project, I haven't been up on the hill there to see Vermont Academy in a few years, and to see it going strong. Of course, the first thing I checked was to make sure that the ski jump was still there and in operation. And to get to come here, I've never been in this building before, but it's really nice. And it's special for me because I spoke Monday night in Burlington, last night at Shelburne Farms. Tonight I'll speak here, and then I don't think I'll be in Vermont again until after the November midterm elections. We'll talk a little bit more about Third Act in a minute, but I'm headed out to Maine tomorrow, and then just from there on in, it's just kind of one red state after another. I've come to the conclusion that Becca Balin's probably pretty safe in re-election campaign. So, but you should make it sure. We'll talk more about that, but just to say, it's truly a pleasure to be in this town. And I love this part of the state. I live in Ripton, up on Middlebury Gap on Route 125. And so it was a real pleasure just to drive down 100, to go over the mountain and drive down 100 today on a beautiful day. And it really was, the last few days have been about as good as Vermont has to offer, it seems to me. And so I will try very hard to be hopeful and positive in a minute. First, I'll just be real for a minute. With precisely where we are, because the depth of the problem that we're in dictates the pace and scale of the solutions that are required. I think there are two big bad things happening on the planet right now. Many things, probably, there's always bad things going on, but two that are very, very large and interconnected. The first is the one that I've been working on since the 1980s, when I wrote the first book about what we then called the greenhouse effect. The things that I warned about and that scientists were warning about in the 1980s have now basically all come true. We're seeing the very rapid rise in temperature on this planet, and it's exacting an extraordinary toll already. Day to day on the surface of the Earth, the thing that we notice is the basic physical principle that warm air holds more water than cold. So in arid areas, we're getting more drought, more evaporation, more drought, and then more fire. To the extent that we're almost not even, I'm afraid, sort of even paying attention anymore as it happens. It's only 18 months ago that our country's second largest city, large parts of it burnt to the ground in a firestorm that unlike anything we've ever seen. So much has happened in the intervening 18 months that it's kind of disappeared down the memory hole. But that kind of thing is happening everywhere around the world, someplace every day. In the US this year, we're already ahead of the record pace for fire, and I'm afraid it may get much worse because, well, we had, and I hope everyone enjoyed, a old school winter in New England. The rest of the country did not. It was the second, taken as a whole, it was the second warmest winter in American history, and by far the warmest winter ever recorded in the western US. There's no snowpack. The odds of truly enormous conflagration are enormous. Once that water's evaporated up into the atmosphere, it comes down. It comes down in deluge. So Vermonters know too much about that after the last 5 years. People used to say that Vermont might be some kind of climate refuge, but it turns out that that's not the case. A state with steep mountainsides and narrow valleys turns out to be, in some respects, a climate trap, just like there are climate traps in almost every part of the world. We've obviously dealt with a lot in this state, but we have, for the moment anyway, enough wealth to provide a certain kind of buffer. That's not true in the rest of the world. When the rains stopped falling at the last big set of floods in Vermont, I was hypersensitive to stories about flooding. And so I noticed that the next week, the rains began to fall very hard in Northern Africa. Like us, they had their biggest rainstorms ever. But unlike us, their infrastructure was shabby enough that the main river in Libya blew out 2 big dams, swept into a coastal city, washed 10,000 people out to sea where they drowned in the course of an hour. Um, um, but of course, we didn't really hear about it because Libya, you know. Um, that's not only sad and reflective of stuff that's happening every day, it also should remind us of the kind of justice implications that we're dealing with here. Forget Libya, all of Africa has put about 3% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are warming the planet. The 4% of human beings who call themselves Americans have put about 25% of those greenhouse gases up there by some kind of rudimentary moral math. If 10,000 people die in a Libyan city, 2,500 of them are on us, you know. We're now seeing not just that kind of superficial and dramatic damage, but I'm afraid damage to very deep parts of the underlying physical systems of the Earth. The jet stream draws its power on the temperature differential between the equator and the poles. As we raise the temperature at the North Pole, the jet stream now gets stuck in these funky high amplitude positions for long periods of time that lead to the sieges of weather that we've been experiencing in so many places and create the opportunities for these heat domes that produce paralyzing heat waves. 100 miles to our east in the Atlantic, the great currents of the Atlantic, which are the biggest heat distribution engine on planet Earth. Taken together, the Gulf Stream and the rest of those currents are 100 times the volume of the Amazon River. Those seem to be beginning to break down. As fresh water pours off of melting Greenland, it's changing the salinity and hence the density of seawater in the North Atlantic. And it's those density differences that drive those giant conveyors. We thought 20 years ago that this was probably a problem for the next century, but it turns out, sadly, that we were wrong. The world's biggest expert on this, a guy named Johann Rockström at the Potsdam Institute, put out a paper 2 weeks ago saying, we're looking at something like a 50% chance of the collapse of those systems in the decades ahead. If that happens, it'll be the largest event in human history. Nothing will compare with the scale of what that will mean do. And the time that we have to deal with all of this is short. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said a couple of years ago that if we wanted to stay on anything like the timeline we'd set out in Paris just a decade ago, we needed to cut emissions in half by 2030, which on my watch is 3 years and 6 months away. So not a great deal of time, a tall task. And it would be a tall task even if, and here I'm just going to talk for a minute about the second crisis I think we face. It would be a tall task even if everybody was working in good faith, but not everybody is. And that's part of this slide into a kind of authoritarianism that's underway around the globe, but particularly obvious in our country. I'm not going to belabor all of this. I think that, I wake up too many mornings at 3 a.m, kind of in a state of sort of despair and anxiety about what's going on and figuring out what we can do. It's very different from all the other periods of American history that I can think of. There have been plenty of presidents I didn't care for, but never a moment like this. And so this last month, we asked, I'll talk about third act in a moment, and I know there's a few third actors here. It's this group we set up for people over the age of 60 across the country about 5 years ago. And we've now got about 120,000 members and really remarkable working groups in most states who are making dramatic change in state legislatures and things. But we asked some of our oldest members, people in their 80s, 90s, 100s, to do short videos just explaining why this moment felt different to them, on the theory the kind of hook was that as our nation celebrates its 250th, if you're reached the age of 83, it means that you've been around for a full third of official American history, which should give you a kind of baseline credibility to make judgments about where we are. And it was really interesting and somewhat painful to listen to these videos. You can see a bunch of them. We published a bunch of them in Rolling Stone a few days ago. There's a link to all of it. You can find it. But they're just, profound. There was a woman, her 95-year-old woman, who said, when I was 4, I watched my sister die of polio. Well, how do you think I feel about what Bobby Kennedy Jr. is doing to public health in this country, and just on and on and on. So we're in a very difficult moment. These two problems are in many ways linked together. Much of the fuel for authoritarianism is fossil fuel. In this country, for instance, if you wonder why it was so easy for Donald Trump to kick over the pillars of our democracy, it's because a bunch of people led by the Koch brothers have spent the last 30 years systematically eroding those foundations. The Koch brothers are our biggest oil and gas barons in this country. They own more refinery and pipeline capacity than anyone else. It was necessary for them to do that so that we would not deal in any significant way with the existential harm that fossil fuel is doing. So, that part is over. I'll switch registers and talk about the one big good thing that's happening at the same time on this planet, and it's big enough and good enough, I think, to perhaps take a bite out of both the climate and the authoritarianism crisis. And that one big good thing is the very sudden, very rapid surge over about the last 48 months in clean energy around the Earth. The stuff that we've spent our lives calling alternative energy. But you shouldn't use that phrase anymore because it's no longer true. This is the obvious, common sense, straightforward way to power the future. Power from the sun and the wind. The wind is just another form of solar power. The sun heats the earth differentially, producing the breezes that turn those majestic turbines. About 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and the wind than from setting stuff on fire, which is a big deal. Humans, the anthropologists, archaeologists tell us, have been setting stuff on fire for at least 700,000 years. We were talking earlier today, Darwin said that fire and language were the two things that marked out our species. And fire was useful for us. We learned to cook food. It gave us the big brain. We were able to move north and south from the equator. No one living in this beautiful spot prior to fire. The anthropologists even think that standing around the campfire every night for many, many eons produced some of the social bonds that mark our species, a kind of proto-Zoom. And when we learned to control the combustion of coal and gas and oil, that was the Industrial Revolution, and it produced modernity, everything around us. So on balance, fire pretty good, but now the price is much too high. The most consequential of those prices is the one that I've outlined, the climate crisis that threatens, indeed guarantees to throw off kilter every physical system on which we depend. But it's not the only cost. 9 million people a year die on this planet, 1 death in 5 from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. There's a lot of educators here. I was in New Delhi not long ago, which is currently the smokiest city on planet Earth. There's 5 million school children there. 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage from breathing the air. Okay? But it's no longer necessary. uh, 10 years ago, the list of the dirtiest cities on the planet was all Chinese cities. None of those make the list or come anywhere close anymore, because in the last 10 years, the Chinese have led this clean energy revolution. They've installed about half the sun and wind and batteries around the planet. And the results have been astonishing. The pace at which they're doing it is astonishing. This time last year, the Chinese were putting up 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. So they were building one of those out of solar panels every 8 hours. Okay? Other places are not matching the Chinese, but at least demonstrating that this need not be confined entirely to China. California is the state that's taken this most seriously. They've passed some kind of tipping point in the last little while, because now, most days, California is producing more than 100% of its energy for long periods of the day from renewable sources. At night, when the sun goes down, the biggest source of electric supply in the 4th largest economy in the world are batteries that spent the afternoon soaking up extra sunshine. And then that's what California runs on when the sun goes down. Those batteries didn't even exist 3 years ago. They're one of the miracles of our time. And they're falling in price with the same speed that sun and wind did. The bottom line from that is that California is using 60% less natural gas to make electricity than they were 3 years ago. So I told you a minute ago that we were going to need to cut emissions in half by 2030, and all of you inwardly groaned because that seemed impossible. We're not going to actually globally cut emissions in half by 2030, but the reason is not technical impossibility. We have the stuff that we need to do this if we wholeheartedly want to work on it. And in many places around the world, that is what's happening. Not just places with command and control economies like China, not just places with great wealth like California. If you go to Pakistan, probably the country hit hardest by climate change. I mean, summer urban temperatures now routinely topping 125 degrees. 2010 and 2023, they had the 2 worst floods on this earth since Noah. The last one displaced 35 million people. But they have one geographic advantage, which is a border with China, across which in the last 18 months have flowed enormous numbers of these cheap solar panels, not under a government program, just people tired of expensive and unreliable electricity buying solar panels and going on YouTube to learn how to hook them together. They've built the equivalent of half the country's electric grid out of solar panels in 18 months. Last fall, even before all the nonsense in the Gulf began, Pakistan told its big LNG supplier, which was Qatar, that it was going to pay the penalty on 24 big shiploads of liquefied natural gas that it had contracted for because it no longer needed them, given the amount of electricity they were producing from the sun. Africa is now following very quickly, and in much of Africa in the last 8 months, people have been in huge numbers replacing the diesel generators that basically have been the electric backbone of those parts of Africa that have electricity, been replacing those with solar panels and batteries. The country that's installing solar panels fastest right now, today, is, and it's a bittersweet story, is Cuba, where we have completely cut off their supply of oil. Schools, hospitals have closed down. The only weapon they have are solar panels that they're importing as fast as they can and trying to put up. I don't think it's going to happen fast enough to save them from complete economic implosion, but they're trying, and it's a valiant thing to watch. So all of this is very good news, unless you own an oil well or a coal mine, in which case it's very bad news, existentially bad news, because it threatens the business model that's made you extraordinarily wealthy. And that explains an awful lot of the politics in our world and in our country right now. Some of you will recall that the President of the United States, when he was a candidate, told oil executives that if they gave him $1 billion, he would do anything that they wanted. They gave him about $500 million, and it turns out that was sufficient, because I think he's gone beyond even what they would have expected of him. The attempt to shut down 90% complete wind farms off the coast of New England, putting all federal land off limits to solar panels. Some of you may recall that under Biden, the post office was starting to electrify their vehicle fleet, which makes great sense. By definition, these trucks are parked at night in one place where you can charge them up. The Postal Service under Trump has been ripping out the EV chargers in their parking lots and salting the ground to make sure we never do this again. This is absurd on many, many grounds. Among other things, it's deeply unpatriotic. This was American technology. First solar cell in the world, 1956, Bell Labs, Edison, New Jersey. First industrial wind turbine on Earth, 1943, Grandpa's Knob, Castleton, Vermont. We should be owning this revolution. Instead, in a sort of act of national economic self-sabotage without parallel, I think, in history, we've turned it over lock, stock, and barrel to the country that's theoretically our chief adversary. It's preposterous, and it will rob our children and grandchildren of much of their future. But it's also just, absurd in so many other ways too. And I will add, in fairness, it's not just Donald Trump that's been doing this. I mean, to be painfully candid about the place that I dearly love, Vermont, we've been terrible at this. Vermont's had a de facto moratorium on wind power for 15 years now because people didn't want to look at wind turbines. We've turned down one solar farm after another across the state on purely aesthetic grounds. People didn't want to look at it. That's not okay, and it should change. Which brings me to what I really want to talk about for a few minutes, which is how we're going to change it to the extent that we can. I think there were two great inventions, technological inventions of the 20th century. One was the solar panel, and the other was the nonviolent social movement, a kind of technology from the margins invented by, it shouldn't work, sort of like a solar panel, it's kind of mysterious, but it does. Invented by the suffragists and by Gandhi and by Dr. King and by a million other people whose names we don't know. And now is the time to be employing that technology in opposition to authoritarianism and climate breakdown. And it's been beautiful to watch it start to happen in lots of ways. We were very privileged this year to get to sit where we were and watch the people of Minnesota figure out how to come together to put the first significant check on Trump's authoritarianism. The bravery, discipline, beauty of what happened in Minneapolis over those 6 or 8 weeks this winter is the equal of what happened during the Montgomery bus boycott 70 years ago this winter, or Gandhi's Salt March 95 years ago this year. And I hope it's a good lesson for all of us, because I think there's every possibility we may get tested in some of the same ways in the time ahead. we need to bring those skills to all these fights, and that's what we've been doing this spring in states around the country. Since we can't work on climate policy in Washington at the moment, that waits on elections, and that's why I'm going to spend the rest of this year through November out trying to influence those elections, and you guys should be trying to dig in too and figure out how you can help. We've been working on climate stuff at the state and local level with real success. The two things we were trying to get done were permitting reform to make it easier to put solar on the roofs of American homes. Americans pay 3 to 5 times as much as Australians or Europeans to put up solar panels. It's not because the panels are more expensive. It's because we have way too much bureaucracy in the way. Every town in Vermont, every town in the country has its own building code, its own set of rules. They want to send some inspectors up on your roof to look at things. They want to trade diagrams back and forth, on and on and on. It takes months and it drives up the cost enormously. This is not how it works in the rest of the world, where putting up a solar panel is essentially the same as buying a refrigerator. You call somebody up on Monday, by Wednesday they're delivering it, by Friday it's pouring power out into the grid. What happens when you have a situation like that? Well, in Australia, where what would cost $30,000 here costs $5,000 or $6,000, 40% of homes have solar panels on the roof. What does that mean? It means that there's so much electricity that beginning in 2 weeks, all Australians forever into the future will, whether they have a solar panel or not, will get 3 free hours of electricity every day between noon and 3. So right now, every Australian is actually looking at the manual for their dishwasher and figuring out how you time it so that it will work in an hour. They're out buying storage batteries, which are now quite cheap, so that they can fill them up with free electricity and run their house at night. The 700,000-year-old human struggle to acquire energy is essentially over in places like that have done the work. The other thing we've been trying to do around the country is make it legal to do the very smallest form of solar energy, what we call plug-in solar or balcony solar. If you've been to Europe in the last few years, you've seen these systems. 5 million Europeans installed them in the last 3 years. You go to IKEA, you pay a few $100s, you come home with a solar panel that's just designed to be zip-tied to the railing of your apartment balcony. On the back is a plug, which you plug into the wall. That is it. No electrician required. It usually produces 20%, 25% of the energy that an apartment uses. So not everything, but nothing either. Illegal in this country until this spring. And we've managed, the third act sort of leading the charge, to get 8 state legislatures so far to legalize this. Vermont will be the 9th if Governor Scott signs the bill that's on his desk, having passed with hefty majorities in both the House and the Senate. Since we never know what Governor Scott's going to do, it wouldn't hurt to send him a note asking him to get this done. But I think by the time the spring is over, we'll have at least 10 states, and that'll be enough to establish a kind of national market for all of this. It will also, if we get it done in Vermont, retroactively legalize the system that I plugged into my house in January. I've been to jail on a number of occasions, but I'd just as soon not go to jail for having a solar panel on the balcony. This is the kind of work that we're going to need to do a lot of around the world over the next few years, because we have to make this happen fast. Sun and wind are cheap enough that eventually they will win out. 40 years from now, we will run the world on sun and wind. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken planet. So our job is to catalyze this reaction, try to make it happen. We're not going to stop global warming. It is too late, sadly, for that. but it is not too late to start shaving tenths of a degree of how hot the planet gets. And each tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature of the Earth, the latest research shows, moves about 100 million human beings, our brothers and sisters, out of a safe climate zone and into a dangerous one. So this is by far the most important work that humans can do, have ever been called to do. Let me sort of wind down by giving my little spiel about who I think should mostly be, or should be deeply involved in doing this. It's very good to have all these educators here, and very good that they are inspiring young people to do this work, and young people really understand and are on it in many ways. Greta Thunberg was not alone. There were millions of people like her around the world. In fact, in 2019, the great global school strike around climate drew 10 million kids into the streets before COVID hit. But young people lack by themselves the structural power to make change on the scale we need in the time that we have. Which is why we started Third Act 5 years ago, to organize people over the age of 60. On the sort of rough analysis that if you have reached the age where you have hair coming out your ears, then you have structural power coming out your ears too. Okay? There are 70 million of us in this country over the age of 60, with a lot of connections, a lot of skills across a lifetime. We have, we have a lot of, we punch above our weight politically because every person in this room voted in the last election. There's no known way to stop old people from voting. And we have an extraordinary obligation. If you're 75, you've been alive for about 80% of all the carbon dioxide that humans have produced in the course of our species. This is by far the biggest thing that our generations have done in our time on Earth. People 500 years from now, assuming there are some and they're looking back, will remember literally nothing else that we did in our time on Earth except goose the temperature so it soared into the stratosphere and changed life on Earth in profound, profound ways. So it's very important that we do what we can, and we can do a ton. After 5 years, there's 120,000 people at Third Act. We're organized in all kinds of ways. I've described this work we did on solar and stuff, but now we're pivoting for the next months to focus hard on the election. We have a PAC, a great PAC, that can raise money and spend money and go fight elections. That's what I'm going to be off doing. It's not always easy or straightforward work. I'm headed to Maine tomorrow, which is, a reminder that politics is always a kind of messy business, but an important and essential one. We're having in an hour our big quarterly call, national call at Third Act. If you go home at 7, you're welcome to join us. Bernie will be joining us tonight to sort of give his sense of what we should be doing. But it's enormous fun, particularly enormous fun backing up young people in this fight. The very first action we did at Third Act, really before we were quite officially formed about 5 years ago, was because a bunch of young people at a group called Fridays for the Future, the sort of offshoot of Greta had given them my number. And they called me up and said, we want to take on the big banks, Chase City, Wells Fargo, B of A, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. We want to be taking them on, but we don't have checking accounts. We don't have credit cards. They won't listen to us. Will you help? And I said, well, if there's one thing we have, it's credit cards. So yes, we'll help. And the very first demonstration we did was in Boston at Downtown Crossing. There's big Chase Bank, I think, there that we were. And there were 200 or 300 high school kids. High school kids understand the barrel of the gun down which they are staring. And they are somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there were a bunch of us from this nascent third act with a big banner that just said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." The kids who were there appreciated it. We talk a lot about climate anxiety among young people, which I think is true, but my sense from talking to lots and lots and lots of kids is that the anxiety is only in part about the actual physical trauma that we're facing. More, it's about the idea that they've been left alone to deal with it. That older generations, scooped the cream off the top of the milk bucket and didn't leave much behind. And we can change that, and we should, and we are. So I hope that some of you will, I'm very grateful that some of you are engaged in third act, and I hope that you'll tell others about it. Let me just finish by saying that though I've talked a lot about the scientific necessity and the economic pragmatism of this transition, there's also something to be said about its sheer beauty. We don't know how prehistoric people thought about the world being prehistoric. They failed to write it down. But we do know that every pile of rocks that they put together, like Stonehenge, invariably points to the solstice or the equinox. We know that the minute people started constructing myths to explain how the world worked in every culture, pretty much the first thing they had to explain was, how does this thing rise over here in the morning, set over here in the afternoon, and weirdly get back over here in the morning? And so there are millions of great stories in world literature about giant emus who vomit up the sun each morning, just on and on and on. And these resonate down to our present day. I wrote a book recently on all of this, from which I stole the title from George Harrison. It's called Here Comes the Sun. And it turns out that that's of all the songs in the Beatles' vast catalog, that's the one that gets streamed more than any other every day, and by a factor of about 2. In part because it's a beautiful, beautiful melody, but in part because it connects with this deep human connection to the most charismatic object in our corner of the universe, the thing that already gives us warmth and light, and via photosynthesis provides our supper, and now is willing, if we wanted, to provide us with the power that we need. I was in Rome last September. The new Pope summoned a bunch of folks over for the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis's remarkable encyclical on climate change, Laudato Si. I'm a Methodist, but they asked me anyway. And it was really wonderful. And the new Pope, who, by the way, is a bizarrely normal American male, If this guy wandered into your Thanksgiving dinner, you would just think your bachelor uncle had shown up from someplace, I really liked him. And he got up and he gave a talk and said, we're going to keep doing all the stuff Francis said. Climate change is the most important thing on Earth, Then he said, almost offhandedly, and when we flip a switch next year on this big solar farm we've built outside Rome, Vatican City will become the first fully solar-powered nation on Earth, which was great. And so when it was my turn to speak, I just said, thank you, Your Holiness, that's very cool. And it provides us with the slogan under which we shall henceforth wage this battle. And the one I leave with you. We'll just keep saying, energy from heaven, not from hell. We'll see what happens. So thank you all very much for being a part of this. I rattled on a little longer than I should have, but I've got 10 or 15 minutes before I have to go join this big third act call. If anybody has questions or comment or critique or abuse or whatever, we'll get to it. In the very back there.
It's actually a two-part question. Do you have children?
I do.
And I just, for all the parents here, I spent the evening last night at a place where there were a lot of children, so they're on my mind. And I was just trying to think of some concise things that you would urge parents to share with their children that is not alarmist but constructive.
Well, I mean, my philosophy on all this was when kids are young, don't share any of this with them. Your job as a parent is to get your kid to fall in love with the world around them, including the outside world. And people end up defending the things that they love. It's too much. It's hard to get someone to fall in love with. I mean, look, it's very rare that people fall in love with someone who's terminally ill because it's just too painful to contemplate, what's going to happen. But once kids are of a certain age, then they're completely ready to. You just need to get them engaged in these fights. So, for instance, we're getting ready. We did this big thing called Sunday last September. Maybe people here helped out. We had 500 events across the country, and they were great. Big celebration of renewable energy. We're going to do it again next summer, June 20th, 2027, on the solstice, and it's going to be global this time. And if you sent your kids to the website, sunday.earth, they can begin by helping us. We have 20,000 drawings of the sun there now that people have come up with. Beautiful, remarkable pieces of art. They're completely ready to engage in the political fight around all this, and should. We were talking earlier with educators, and I was saying I think kids have pretty good bullshit detector. And so if you tell them something that's too easy, then they're liable to not believe that that's going to changing the light bulb is going to save the planet. And they're more or less correct about that. It's a good idea to change the light bulb. There's no reason not to. But, I live in a house that's been covered with solar panels for 25 years. They're connected to the EV in the garage. I'm happy about that. But I don't think we're going to win this battle one, garage at a time, one vegan dinner at a time. The most important thing that individuals can do, including kids, is not be quite as much individuals and join together with others in movements large enough to change the ground rules. And kids really get that. Look, Greta was, as I said before, in no way alone. She was 15, 14 when she started. Last summer I got to write her a note congratulating her on her graduation from high school. So, let that sink in for a minute. And there's so many people just like her. We've got one sitting in the front row right here. So don't shortchange kids and their ability to do all this. And make it as much fun as possible. And it is, standing up to bad guys is fun. That's what every, Marvel movie that there ever is just what it's about, so whatever.
Just you mentioned third act for the people who are here. There's 800 of us across the state. There's a group that meets at the Rockingham Library twice a month. Thirdact.org. Go, look, sign up. We'll get back in touch with you.
Thank you.
Right.
One of the crazy secrets of American politics is that, especially at the state level, people are so disengaged and apathetic that 800 people joined together behind a common cause is enough to wreak real power in a place like Montpelier, in any state capital. So this is a real opportunity to get something done. And it's and it's fun, and it's also one of the benefits of aging is that at a certain point it's just like, what do you care? Like, what do they, I always worry about doing anything that, might send young people off to jail, say, because they're, if you're 18, you don't want it. We shouldn't be giving people arrest records, especially in the current climate. But after a certain age, what the hell are they going to do to you? I mean, it's just, we have a certain kind of freedom which we should gleefully exercise.
Well, why do you think that people get into this scientific pity pat things? The opponents of climate change go. Is it just some way to stall things?
No, it's organized disinformation. We know now from great investigative reporting that back in the 1980s, when I was writing my book, when Jim Hansen was doing his groundbreaking research at NASA, that the oil companies were engaged in exactly the same exercise. I mean, at that point, Exxon was the largest company on Earth. They had endless number of great scientists, and their product was carbon. So they were going to find out what was going on, and find out they did. We now know that their predictions for what the temperature was going to be in 2020 were even better than NASA's. And they completely believed it. Exxon started building all its drilling rigs higher to compensate for the rise in sea level that they knew was in the offing. But what they didn't do was tell the rest of us. Instead, they, across this industry, built this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation. It kept us locked for decades in an utterly sterile debate about whether or not global warming was real. A debate, remember, that both sides knew the answer to at the start. It was just one of them was willing to lie. And if you repeat a lie often enough, it begins to work. The Republican president at the beginning of the global warming era was George H.W. Bush. When the first science was coming out, when I was writing my book, he said, "We will fight the greenhouse effect with the White House effect." Okay, which is a pretty good line. And why wouldn't you take it seriously? But that was before the fossil fuel industry coalesced into this opposition. Now, the Republican president of the United States keeps insisting global warming is a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, okay? If you were sitting on a bus and someone was muttering, global warming is a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, you would get up and change seats. But instead, that's who this afternoon sent off $765 million to buy back more wind rights that had been leased to companies. Companies had paid to all of us. Now we're paying them to rescind those wind rights so that offshore wind will never be harvested.
I think we have time for one more question, and then you have an important call to get on.
Yes.
Me.
Yes.
The oil industry is turning into the plastics industry, and that's the next thing we really have to deal with.
Yep. And there's important work going on plastics. I'm on the board of a group called Beyond Plastics. That's sort of, Bennington is kind of the, Judy Enck, my old friend, is kind of a key part of all of that. And it's true that to the degree that we thwart the oil industry on, drive down the amount of natural gas that they're using, the next use for that they're trying to is more single-use plastics for things. So we should fight it, and we do fight it. It's not as existential. Nothing is as existential as what we're doing to the temperature of the Earth. That's the lever that controls every other thing that happens on the surface of the planet. We're introducing vast amounts more energy into this system, which we're, by the way, going to be reminded of in a big, dramatic fashion over the next 12 or 14 months, because the El Nino that's about to break over our heads looks like it's going to be very large, and it will drive temperatures higher than humans have ever seen them before, and by a considerable margin. We may start approaching by the end of 2027, the 2 degrees Celsius level for a little while. And so we'll find out a lot about what those kind of temperatures do to everything on the planet. We've got to arrest that. It's going to be bad no matter what we do. It already is bad, and it's going to get worse. But what we're playing for now, in absolutely serious terms, is whether we can not stop this, but stop it short of the place where it just cuts civilizations off of their needs. We don't know the answer to whether we really still can or not. There's enormous physical momentum in these systems. The great ice sheets of the Antarctic, we learn more each week, are now destabilizing in faster than we had even feared. The collapse of the Gulf Stream, this ongoing savannification of the great rainforests and especially the Amazon. These physical forces are enormous. Our time to try and reverse them limit them is very, very short. But, and this is as good a place to end as any, we do finally have a weapon to use in that fight. And that weapon is cheap solar panel and the cheap wind turbine. And we should embrace it. And we should embrace it, among other things, since we're in an art center here, in a kind of aesthetic fashion. I mean, the reason in Vermont that we're not doing this at the pace that we should is because our sense of what the Vermont landscape should look like is somehow injured by the idea that we might be producing the energy that we use here close to home. We've got to get over that. I live in the Champlain Valley. We grow lots of corn. If we take 2 or 3% of those cornfields and replace them with solar panels, that's a very good thing. We don't need any more corn. Corn we used to produce milk. We have way more milk than we need. That's why 9/10 of the dairies in Vermont have gone out of business in the last 50 years. The price of milk is too low. The crop we need is clean electrons. And what do you know? You can grow that crop without pouring nitrogen and phosphorus on solar panels, which then wash into Lake Champlain and fill it with algae. And when we put up a solar farm, we're left with half the field to play with. The rows in between the solar panels, which is the biggest new canvas for human ingenuity in decades on this planet. I have neighbors in Middlebury, Mike and Tanya Kernan, who've set up this great nonprofit called Be the Change that is busily interplanting solar farms across Vermont with pollinator attracting weeds and flowers. And what do you know? It really works. The number of pollinators is 100 times larger than in an agricultural field because you don't have to spray solar panels with pesticides to make them work. And as a result, the surrounding farmland and orchards, fruit set and pollination go way, way up. And we take some bite out of the biodiversity crisis at the same time. So this is a call for human beings to embrace their sense, many of their senses, their sense of creativity and their sense of humanity. I mean, in a divided world right now, the great and obvious project for all of our countries to be engaged in is rapidly building out clean energy across the world. Running the factories in China that produce solar panels 24/7 and piling up the panels on every railroad siding and wharf on planet Earth so that people can come and take them away and make their own Pakistans, everywhere. On and on and on. This is hard to imagine in our current divided world, but not quite as hard to imagine as it was 8 or 10 weeks ago. Donald Trump, churlish idiot that he is, has nonetheless provided a remarkable demonstration that has not been lost on leaders across the world who all of a sudden know that though sunlight has to travel 93 million miles to reach the Earth, none of those miles go through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's an interesting moment, and we all should figure out how to embrace it. And I just thank you guys enormously.